welcome to Plain Civics. I'm Joe Ulery with
Bobbi Fisher.
So today, Bobbi, we're talking about the origins of civic education in the U.S.
But before we get started, you answered 5 questions last podcast. Today, it's time to put me on the spot. Ready? The Fast 5.
All righty. Dog or cat?
Dog.
Steak or pizza?
Pizza.
Beach or snow skiing?
Beach.
Fiction or nonfiction?
Nonfiction.
Rom-com or horror?
It's like Whitney or Fleetwood Mac all over again. I wish I would have been like rom-com or documentary. I think I have to go rom-com. That's my only choice. Well, okay, so I'm going with rom-com.
Okay.
So back to today's topic, the origins of civic education in the U.S. Bobbi?
When you think about your kids waking up and going off to school 5 days a week, you should think civic education. Back in the early 1800s, as our nation was growing pretty rapidly, less than 40% of children ages 5 to 19 were actually getting any type of education.
And I can see that, like, when I look back at my grandparents, they grew up on farms, and some of them got to the 8th grade, and then mom or dad wanted them to stay home and work in the field. So my grandpa couldn't read, yet still found his way successfully through society.
And a lot of people don't even realize, why some places it's changed, but why do they only go to school from August to May? Or it used to be back when I was in school, September to May, but a lot of people were farmers.
Yep.
And they needed their kids to work on the farms during the summer.
Detasseling had to happen before school could start. There probably wasn't air conditioning in all the classrooms.
Everybody had mechanized tractors. A lot of it was hard, time-consuming work, so the kids were needed to do that. So that's why we have, in most cases still, the basic 5-day school week from August to May, although some places are changing with the times and doing what they call year-round school now. Back in the 1800s, government leaders and education leaders realized a need for young people to develop knowledge and skills that they would need to engage in our new democracy. One of the early education leaders at the time, probably the most well-known one, was Horace Mann, who's often referred to as the father of American education. He argued for, and this is a quote from Horace Mann, free, standardized, and universal schooling. Mann felt that this type of schooling was essential for learning how to continue his, quote, the grand American experiment of self-governance. He later said, woe to the republic that rests upon no better foundations than ignorance, selfishness, and passion. He, as well as governmental leaders, realized that our nation was growing rapidly, and a lot of the leaders were old and growing older, and we needed people with the knowledge that they needed and the skills to carry on.
It's the passing of the torch.
We had this great experiment in government, as we've talked about, and who was going to continue it. So this idea of a shared school experience where all children, no matter their social status, so it didn't matter if you were rich or poor, could all receive a standard quality education. And that was the intent, first and foremost, to develop citizens who grew up with knowledge and skills to engage in a democracy.
Have we forgotten that was the original intent?
I believe so. Unless you're an education major in college. I remember learning that in one of my required education classes.
The 3 R's.
Reading, writing, and arithmetic.
That doesn't include what we're talking about here.
No, but that was the intent. I guess we can't say it was the only intent. They wanted kids to learn other things, but they wanted part of the focus to be developing good citizens and knowledgeable citizens.
That was the foundation.
The original goal of public education. But today, it's more and more pushed to the marginal areas because of many factors. Business leaders may feel things like math and science are more important because they're interested in their businesses.
This whole thing of STEM and how it's tied to the economy, there's almost now a discussion out there of college diplomas outpriced. Would it make more sense to do some of these other specialized schools? And I know this isn't part of our script, I'm just talking out loud, but STEM seems to be driving a lot of the businesses that Indiana at least has going on right now.
What I used to tell my students, you're not all going to use algebra or chemistry. And the original idea in this standardized education was that students would get a sampling of all subjects, but still the bottom line goal for all of them, even though not all of them might use algebra or
Sure.
was they're all going to be citizens, and they need this basic underlying information to do that. And then if they want to be an engineer later on, they've got the basics, they can go on and expand, but they're all going to be citizens.
What year was this all started?
First half of the 19th century.
It's amazing. It really is amazing when you think about the people that put the thought into how to form our country and make it run. Yes, it's complex, but a lot of super smart founding fathers, leaders, lived and breathed the civics around us all day and all night long. They put their whole life into it.
Right. Civics has kind of gotten pushed to the side along with a lot of the other social studies. Not that they're not taught, but if anything's going to be left out because there's some important standardized math or language arts test that has to be pushed, then that is the subject, along with the arts, is going to be left behind. That's why it's important for us to increase the quality and amount of civic education that we have in our schools today. And it can be easily incorporated. You were talking about STEM. Mm-hmm. I know the latest education, having been in it for over 30 years, there's always these buzzwords or keywords that come about in cycles.
Like synergy.
So I was looking, yes. Now I guess this was from a study, big study that apparently a lot of educators use today. It used to be like the 4 C's. Now they call it the 6 C's, which stand for collaboration, communication, critical thinking, content, creative innovation, and confidence. And all of those can be included. You can teach civic education and put all of those into that, along with whatever math and sciences.
Yes.
So STEM and civics can exist, all of it together.
Yeah, I almost think civics needs to be baked into whatever we teach for us to not be dysfunctional as a society.
Exactly. Accepting somebody else's viewpoint on something. I've been in a lot of jobs over the course of my lifetime where if you're not the boss, you have to listen to what the boss says or their guidance. So it doesn't matter what type of occupation you're in or whatever. Those are still skills that you're going to use being a citizen.
In a society, that's how society works, is rules, following the rules.
Exactly. We're all citizens, as we've said before. We should all have a basic understanding of our government and its processes, different political ideologies, civic and constitutional rights, and the history and heritage of this. Like, where did these ideas for the Constitution come from? And that's something we'll talk about down the road.
Yeah.
Different political ideologies, like in the last election, for example, I'm scrolling through stuff, I would see a lot of people saying, well, they're communist or they're a Marxist or socialist. Not really. People use those terms loosely. They don't really understand even basically what they mean.
That name calling has become so easy and so meaningless for the person who's calling the name. Don't really think about what they're calling. And I've also found recently that if I approach things with a positive attitude, even if it's something that I don't agree with, we all have more in common than we remember.
Exactly.
At the end of the day, we should be able to walk away as ladies or gentlemen from the conversation.
Civic disposition, being able to have civic values and to respect other people's ideas and thoughts and have appreciation for civil discourse. Yes, you may not agree, but like you were saying, we can agree to disagree and not be mad at each other.
Not hate each other.
And call each other names.
Right.
And this is how I feel. This is how you feel. Also, going along with that is the idea of free speech. I see that thrown around a lot. It's totally misunderstood by most people what is meant by free speech. Just like calling people Marxists and socialists, people don't really understand free speech. But we have differing perspectives, and we need to learn to be able to understand those, learn that it's okay to disagree, but to do so in an accepting way.
We sort of tend to lean where we aligned with our parents or their grandparents, our political beliefs. Sometimes we don't really know what we believe because guess we just sort of believe what we were
Right.
told to believe. And you talked about kids signing up to vote for the first time, and then it's like, how do I know if I'm a Republican or a Democrat?
Right.
That could be
Well,
2 or 3 episodes.
But yeah, I mean, it's like one of the things I used to ask students, of course, they were 8th graders, how many of you are going to be 18 when you're a senior in high school? And usually it was about 2/3 of them. And I said, so you're going to be able to vote when you're a senior in high school, and in high school you're only required in Indiana to take 1 semester of government, and you may not have that until the 2nd semester. So if voting is in the fall, this here in 8th grade is going to be your only exposure. And how do you make that decision? And of course, a lot of hands would go up and say, well, I'm going to be a Republican because my parents are and my
Right.
grandparents were, or Democrat or whatever. And that's where we would go onto the spectrum of, here's the political spectrum, really saying you're going to vote one party or the other because that's what your parents did. That's not really how it should work. You should be informed enough and know yourself enough to know what your values are, and your values might be different than your parents, especially when you're 18.
Well, that's the thing. It's interesting. That I have an 84-year-old aunt, and she and I were talking about this the other day, and she said, when I was told it was time for me to sign up to vote, she said, I wrote Republican because that's what your grandpa was. He was a staunch Republican, so I wrote that down. But the thing is, when I think back of when I was a teenager, I don't remember agreeing a lot with my parents on anything.
Right. and that's the thing, I would tell them, when you're 18, you may or may not agree with your parents. A lot of factors go into it, maybe who you hang around with, if you're well-read.
And
so
experience in life
yes.
changes how we feel about things,
so
too.
Just to say, well, I'm going to be this because my parents, you can do that, but it's not the best way to go about performing your citizenly duties.
Here's the good news. Just because you write down one thing on that time you turn 18 to get signed up to vote doesn't mean you can't change it down the road.
Exactly.
You aren't baked in for the rest of your life.
Just because you register as one political party or the other, you don't have to step up to the machine and vote for every Republican or every Democrat. I would argue that voting a straight ticket really isn't what was intended back when our framers established. In fact, they didn't want political parties at all.
Right.
Look at the individual candidates.
And questions. Sometimes there are questions, retention questions for judges, and rarely in Indiana, because I don't know that our system here affords it, but constitutional questions that we sometimes see in other states.
Right. And that kind of brings to the last part of the basic understanding of civics, developing civic behaviors. First of all, have the desire and the confidence to vote. And I think in that confidence, that's where we're looking at not just saying, well, I'm going to vote this way because so-and-so did or my parents did. Having the confidence and the knowledge to make up your own mind based on your beliefs and feelings. Also, volunteering is a civic behavior that hopefully a lot of people will develop. Attending public meetings. If you're mad about the street that's torn up, you've got to be willing to not just sit at McDonald's in the morning and complain to your buddies, but go and tell the people that can make the changes that you want. You may not always get them, but at least you have tried. So that's engaging with your leaders. You also need to engage with your community.
So many times I covered every city council meeting, every county council meeting, every county commissioners meeting, every school board meeting when I was a local reporter. And it was interesting because generally people, in my experience, through my eyeballs, did not show up on an issue until it was almost too late to get involved. And there most likely were several different discussions about that topic in other departments, the Plan Commission, or at different meetings way before it came to this final vote. I always found that people were reluctant to get involved and put their name on it until it was almost too late.
One thing that's scary to me is today, even though we have more ways to get news, because you don't just have like your paper newspaper, radio, and 24/7 news cycles,
you got Facebook.
Yeah. Twitter or X, right? No. But even though we have more ways to get information, less people are like reading the news. I mean, we have all these newspapers going out of business, and a lot of people don't listen to regular radio anymore. I'm guilty of that. If I want to hear music, I listen to Sirius.
The whole thing I do at my full-time job is we provide stories throughout the state of Indiana, because in very few communities anymore are there healthy newspapers printing anything other than press releases and community calendar announcements. You know, there are radio stations, but there's not a newsroom staff covering these meetings. There's not accountability at these meetings. A lot of times people are watching them online, but there's nothing better than being in the room when the conversation is happening and coming up to the microphone when it's time for public input and putting your name on it and saying your opinion.
And you can go like to the city website or whatever and see like agendas for things that are coming up.
They're always published in advance too.
But a lot of people won't take the time to do that. So like you said, they're coming in at the last minute.
Coming in hot.
By then it's too late.
Exactly.
Sometimes.
I think that's a great point.
If we think about the correlation between the more recent lack of civic education in our schools over the last 2 or 3 decades at least, and the deterioration and polarization of our political environment and low voter turnout.
Low voter turnout.
In the U.S. overall, we had less than 64% in 2024 in the fall election. And in Indiana, it was under 59%. We were one of 9 of the 50 states that were less than the national average as far as voter turnout.
I want to be shocked, but I'm not shocked. That's a shocking thing to say, but I've also researched it myself, and it's a fact.
Mm-hmm. The strange thing is, it's easier to vote than it was 20 years ago.
Absolutely.
Yes, in some states, including Indiana, you have to have the ID, and so some people are going to use excuses about, well, I can't get one, or I don't have a way to get there. If there's a will, there's a way.
There is. You can always vote by ordering a ballot in the mail. If you are a shut-in or somebody who can't make it out to the polls, they have folks that go out and canvass neighborhoods that you can get a ballot from lots of different ways.
In Indiana, anyway, Cass County and a lot of others, you have multiple days that you can go vote.
Even weekends.
Yes. I usually vote on Saturday mornings. 20 years ago, that was not 10 years ago. I don't think that was the case.
Agreed.
It's fairly recent. You can't just say, well, I can't go on the second Tuesday in November between 6 and 6 because I work 12-hour shifts. That's not an excuse anymore.
It's hard to have a legitimate excuse anymore. You try to stop me from voting, is what I say. I'm going to find a way to vote.
Right. It should be something that every citizen finds there's a will, there's a way.
Yes.
I'm going to go do it. It should be that important to them.
We should spend a whole podcast just talking about the voting process and registration. We're never going to run out of topics.
Right. No. I have two notebook pages of topics. But these first ones we're trying to kind of put in some kind of semblance of order. So like today, public education, as created back in the first part of the 1800s, was intended to give young people the tools they needed to navigate and maintain the complicated democratic republic that our framers created. And some of you may be saying, democratic republic?
Right, and that's the next episode.
That is going to be the next episode. We hear, oh, we're a democracy. We're a republic. Well, what's federal? I'm going to break down what democratic republic means.
Bobbi breaks it down.
I will. Our job, as Ben Franklin said, is to teach our citizens how to keep our democratic republic, because we did not want a monarchy.
Which is the whole reason America exists.
Exactly.
Bueller.
Now, a civics pop quiz.
Bueller.
Bobbi, what was last week's question?
So last week's question was, what is the supreme law of the land? If you said the Constitution, you are correct. Ding, ding, ding.
Failed to form it in the form of a question. We will still count it.
So the U.S. Constitution is the supreme law of the land.
So congratulations to everybody that got that right. Do you have a question for next episode?
Hopefully this one will be easier. Maybe not. What do we call the first 10 amendments to the Constitution?
That's one I know. I'm feeling pretty cocky about my answer.
Okay.
So we'll give you that answer on the next episode. We would both like to say thank you very much to the Westfield, Indiana Public Library for hosting us for today's episode.
This is Plain Civics. Join us for the journey as we break down the basics of how government works so you can make the government work for you.